I used to listen to this sound for hours. The steady, hopeful rhythm of my baby's heart. It was the only thing that felt real in a world that had become a nightmare. He called me a phase, a temporary chapter in his grand life story. But the woman he left me for, she had another name for herself. She called herself his Endgame, and she wasn't just a whisper in the shadows. She was a headline, a social media siren broadcasting my humiliation to the world. This isn't just a story about a cheating husband. It's about a war fought in boardrooms, on Instagram feeds, and in the silent, desperate moments of a woman left with nothing but the promise of a new life growing inside her. What would you do if the man you loved, the father of your child, erased you with a single word? The scent of 1,000 white roses clung to the air in our penthouse apartment, a fragrant testament to my husband's latest grand gesture. Liam Carrington loved grand gestures. They were as much a part of his brand as the tailored Tom Ford suits he wore and the audacious multi-billion-dollar tech deals he closed. From the outside, our life was a meticulously curated fairy tale. Liam, the self-made millionaire, the boy from a forgotten corner of Queens who had clawed his way to the apex of Manhattan's elite. And me, Evelyn Reed Carrington, the girl from a quiet Connecticut suburb, the art history major who had captured his heart. Our story was the kind tabloids adored. We'd met at a charity gala, a whirlwind romance that culminated in a lavish wedding at the plaza. He was 32, I was 26. He was driven, intense, a force of nature. I was, in his words, his calm in the storm. "You ground me, Evie," he would murmur into my hair, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through my very bones. "You're my sanctuary." For 5 years I had embraced that role. I managed our homes, the Park Avenue penthouse, the sprawling Hamptons estate, the charming villa overlooking Lake Como. I planned the society dinners, charmed his business partners, and stood by his side, a constant smiling presence as he built his empire, Carrington Innovations. Our life was a ballet of perfection, every step choreographed, every pirouette flawless. And now the final, most precious act was about to begin. I was 4 months pregnant with our first child, a son. Liam had been ecstatic, or so I thought. The day we found out, he'd lifted me off my feet, spinning me around in our sun-drenched living room, the city skyline a glittering backdrop to our joy. A son, Evie, an heir, our legacy. He'd commissioned a nursery that would have made royalty envious, complete with a hand-painted mural of constellations on the ceiling. He'd bought me a new, ridiculously expensive push present, a sapphire necklace that matched my eyes. Every action, every word seemed to reinforce the narrative we had so carefully built. We were the Carringtons. We were invincible. But lately a subtle dissonance had crept into our perfect symphony. It was nothing I could put my finger on, just a series of discordant notes. The late nights at the office became later, the business trips more frequent. When he was home, he was distant, his mind seemingly a million miles away, lost in the blue glow of his phone. The easy intimacy we once shared felt strained. The silence between us heavy with unspoken things. "Is everything okay, Liam?" I'd asked one evening, tracing the tense line of his jaw as he stared out at the city lights. He'd flinched almost imperceptibly before schooling his features back into a mask of placid reassurance. "Just stress, baby. A new acquisition. It's a monster deal." He'd kissed my forehead, a perfunctory gesture that held none of his usual warmth. "Don't you worry your pretty little head about it." I'd let it go, just as I'd let go of the other small oddities. The faint scent of a perfume I didn't wear clinging to his suit jacket. The way he'd started password protecting his personal laptop, something he'd never done before. I was his sanctuary, his calm. Sanctuaries weren't supposed to ask too many questions. They were supposed to be a place of peace, of unwavering trust. And I trusted Liam. I had built my entire world on that trust. The first crack in my perfect world appeared not with a bang, but with a tap on a screen. I was scrolling through Instagram, a mindless distraction, while waiting for him to come home. The algorithm, in its infinite and often cruel wisdom, suggested a new profile to follow. The name was unfamiliar, Marin Cortez. The profile picture was a stunning brunette, her lips curved in a self-assured smirk, her eyes glinting with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. She was posed on the deck of a yacht, the sunset casting her in a golden glow. The background looked suspiciously like the view from our villa on Lake Como. I clicked on her profile. It was public, a curated feed of luxury and audacity. Designer clothes, exotic travel, champagne flutes, and cryptic captions that hinted at a life of unapologetic indulgence. There were pictures in Mykonos where Liam had supposedly been for a solo tech conference 2 months ago. A shot of her driving a vintage Porsche, remarkably similar to the one Liam kept at our Hamptons estate. A cold dread began to seep into my bones, chilling me despite the warmth of the apartment. It was circumstantial, I told myself. A coincidence. Manhattan's elite was a small, incestuous world. People traveled to the same places, drove the same cars. I was being paranoid. I was a pregnant woman, my hormones were running wild. But then I saw it. A post from 3 days ago. It was a close-up shot of her hand, perfectly manicured, resting on a man's arm. The man's face was out of frame, but the sleeve of his suit was visible, a distinctive Tom Ford design. And on his wrist was the vintage Patek Philippe watch I had given Liam for our 5th anniversary. The caption was what made my world tilt on its axis. 6 words that would come to haunt my waking and sleeping hours. He says, I'm his endgame. My breath caught in my throat. I scrolled frantically through her posts, my fingers trembling. The comments were a sycophantic chorus of praise. Queen, get it, girl. He's a lucky man. One comment stood out from a user named @ChloeBax, my best friend Chloe's account. My heart stopped. But a closer look revealed it was a fake profile using her picture. A calculated, cruel detail. The room suddenly felt airless, the scent of the roses cloying and suffocating. The grand gesture, the beautiful flowers, they weren't a celebration of our future. They were a smokescreen, a beautifully arranged lie. The sound of the key in the front door made me jump. Liam was home. I quickly locked my phone, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had to confront him. I had to know the truth. But how? How do you ask the man you love if your entire life is a lie? He walked in, loosening his tie, a weary sigh escaping his lips. Long day, he said, dropping his briefcase by the door. He came over to me, leaning down to kiss me. I flinched, turning my head so his lips met my cheek instead of my mouth. He frowned, his brow furrowing in confusion. Everything okay, Evie? And there it was, the opening. The moment to shatter the illusion. I took a deep breath, the words tasting like poison on my tongue. Liam, I began, my voice barely a whisper. Who is Marin Cortez? The name hung in the air between us, heavy and toxic. For a fleeting second, a flicker of genuine panic crossed Liam's face. It was there, and then it was gone, replaced by a cool, almost bored indifference that was far more chilling than any angry denial would have been. He straightened up, his 6'2" frame suddenly seeming to tower over me. He walked over to the bar, his back to me, and began to pour himself a scotch. The clinking of the ice against the crystal glass was the only sound in the room. Where did you hear that name? He asked, his voice low and devoid of emotion. I saw her Instagram. I said, my own voice gaining a sliver of strength from the adrenaline coursing through me. I saw your watch on her post, Liam. The one I gave you. The one you told me was in for repairs. He took a slow sip of his drink before turning to face me. The man looking at me was not the husband I knew. His eyes, usually so full of warmth and affection when they landed on me, were now cold, hard chips of ice. He looked at me as if I were a stranger, an inconvenience. You shouldn't be snooping, Evelyn, he said, his tone laced with a condescending disapproval. It's unbecoming. Unbecoming, I repeated, my voice rising with disbelief. You're cheating on me, Liam, while I'm pregnant with your child, and you're worried about what's unbecoming. He sighed, a long, theatrical exhalation of breath, as if I were a petulant child throwing a tantrum. He set his glass down and walked towards me, his movement slow and deliberate. He stopped a few feet away, his hands in his pockets, his posture relaxed, almost casual. "Look, Evie," he began, and the casualness of his tone was like a slap in the face. Us, it's been a great run. You've been wonderful. Exactly what I needed when I was building the company. You're beautiful, you're elegant, you're the perfect hostess. You played the part beautifully." "The part," I whispered, the words getting stuck in my throat. "The part of your wife." A small, cruel smile played on his lips. "Yes, the part of my wife. And you were very convincing. But things change, Evelyn. I've changed. My life is ascending to a new level. The kind of level that requires a different kind of partner." A different kind of partner. The pieces were clicking into place, each one a shard of glass in my heart. Like Marin Cortez. Marin is different, he said, a strange, almost reverent look in his eyes. "She's not a sanctuary, Evelyn. She's a battlefield. She challenges me. She's as ambitious as I am. She understands the world I operate in. She's not content to just stand by my side and look pretty. She wants to conquer the world with me." The cruelty of his words was breathtaking. He was taking everything I thought he loved about me, my calmness, my support, my devotion, and twisting it into a weakness, a liability. "So what was I, Liam?" I asked, my voice trembling. "What were the last 5 years of my life? What is this baby?" I placed a protective hand on my stomach, a gesture of pure instinct. His eyes followed the movement, and for the first time a flicker of something unreadable crossed his face. It wasn't remorse. It was something closer to annoyance. And then he said the words that would forever be seared into my memory, the words that would become the anthem of my heartbreak. "Evelyn," he said, his voice soft, almost gentle, which made the words all the more brutal. "You're just a phase, a beautiful, wonderful phase, but a phase nonetheless. And this," he gestured vaguely towards my belly, "this is just an unfortunate complication." The world went silent. The city lights outside the window blurred into a meaningless smear of color. The scent of the roses was now nauseating the smell of decay. A phase. An unfortunate complication. My son. Our son. An unfortunate complication. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were floating above my own body watching this scene unfold. I saw myself standing there, my hand on my pregnant belly, my face a mask of shock and devastation. I saw the man I had loved, the man I had built a life with, standing before me, looking at me as if I were nothing more than a line item on a balance sheet that needed to be cleared. "Get out!" I said, the words coming out in a choked whisper. He raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me. Get out!" I screamed, the sound tearing from my throat, raw and primal. "Get out of my home. Our home. Evelyn." He corrected me, his voice still infuriatingly calm. "And I'm not going anywhere. This is my apartment. You're the one who will be leaving." He turned and walked back to the bar, picking up his scotch as if the conversation were over, as if he had just informed me that he was changing his brand of coffee. I stood there frozen for what felt like an eternity. The adrenaline that had propelled me forward had vanished, replaced by a cold, creeping numbness. He was right. It was his apartment, his money, his life. I was just a guest, a temporary resident. A phase. I walked zombie-like into our bedroom. His clothes were still hanging in the closet, his scent still lingering on the sheets. I pulled out a suitcase and began to pack, my movements jerky and uncoordinated. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't stay there another second. As I was zipping up my suitcase, my phone buzzed. A notification from Instagram. Against my better judgment, I looked. It was a new post from Marin Cortez, a professional-looking photo of her and Liam taken at what looked like a red carpet event. He was in a tuxedo, she in a slinky silver gown that left little to the imagination. His arm was wrapped possessively around her waist, and he was looking at her with an intensity, a raw adoration that he hadn't looked at me with in years. The caption was simple and aimed directly at me. I knew it as surely as I knew my own name. The Endgame has begun. Hatch and Carrington power couple. Unstoppable. And beneath the caption, a single comment from a verified account, Marcus Vance Liam's right-hand man and COO of Carrington Innovations. The future is now. Congratulations, boss. The betrayal was complete. It wasn't just Liam. It was his entire world. They had all known. They had all watched as I'd blissfully planned a nursery for a baby he considered an unfortunate complication. They had all been in on the secret. My numbness gave way to a white-hot rage. A rage so intense it burned away my tears. He wanted me to leave, fine. I would leave, but I would not go quietly. I would not disappear like a phase. He had underestimated me. He had mistaken my kindness for weakness, my devotion for docility. He was about to find out just how wrong he was. I closed my suitcase, a new steely resolve hardening within me. He may have thought this was his endgame, but I was about to change the rules of the game. This was not the end of my story. It was the beginning of a war, and I would not lose, for myself and for the tiny innocent life that was depending on me. The doorman, a kind-faced man named George, who had always treated me with a gentle deference, couldn't hide the pity in his eyes as I walked through the lobby, my single suitcase in tow. He called me Mrs. Carrington, as he always did, but the name felt like a costume I was desperate to shed. I didn't correct him. In that moment, I didn't have the strength. My first and only call was to Chloe. My Chloe. Not the imposter on Instagram, but the real fiercely loyal friend who had been my maid of honor and my anchor through every storm, though none had ever been like this. She answered on the first ring, her voice a cheerful, "Hey, Evie, how's my favorite future mama?" The dam broke. A sob thick and ragged escaped my lips. "Chloe," I managed to choke out. Can I come over? I'm buzzing you in right now," she said, her tone instantly shifting from cheerful to all business. She didn't need any other explanation. Chloe's apartment in the West Village was a cozy, cluttered haven, a world away from the sterile, minimalist perfection of my penthouse. Books overflowed from shelves. Colorful textiles were draped over furniture, and the air smelled of coffee and her signature lavender-scented candles. It smelled like home. She enveloped me in a hug the moment I stepped through the door, holding me tight as I sobbed uncontrollably, my carefully constructed composure shattering into a million pieces. She guided me to her worn velvet sofa, wrapped me in a quilt, and pressed a mug of chamomile tea into my trembling hands. "Tell me everything," she said, her voice soft but firm. And I did. I told her about the Instagram posts, the confrontation, the cold, cruel words Liam had used to discard me. I told her about Marin Cortez calling herself his endgame. I told her about Marcus Vance's public endorsement of their affair. By the time I finished, my voice was raw and the tea in my mug was cold. Chloe's face was a mask of cold fury. "That absolute bastard," she hissed, her eyes flashing. "That narcissistic, sociopathic, grade-A bastard. And Marcus, I always knew he was a weasel. The future is now. I'll show him the future." "What do I do, Chloe?" I whispered, feeling utterly lost. "He said he's kicking me out. He said the baby is an unfortunate complication." "Okay, first things first," Chloe said, her mind already working, strategizing. "We need to get you a lawyer. Not just any lawyer. We need a shark, a piranha, the kind of lawyer who makes men like Liam Carrington weep." She pulled out her laptop and started typing furiously. Chloe was a journalist, a damn good one, and her network of contacts was vast and varied. While she searched, I found myself numbly scrolling through Marin Cortez's Instagram feed again. It was a form of self-torture, but I couldn't look away. It was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Every post was a carefully crafted missile aimed at me. A picture of her wearing a diamond bracelet with the caption, "Some things are just meant to be." A selfie of her and Liam on a private jet clinking champagne glasses captioned, "To New Beginnings." She had even posted a picture of a ridiculously large modern art sculpture being delivered to a warehouse with the tag, "At Carrington Innovations New HQ Art Piece." The old one was just not to my taste. She was erasing me piece by piece, not just from Liam's life, but from the very company he had built, a company I had supported from the very beginning. "I found someone," Chloe announced, snapping me out of my trance. Her name is an old-school legal powerhouse, a name that strikes fear into the hearts of Manhattan's philandering husbands. She specializes in high-net-worth divorces, and her nickname is the Lioness. She sounds perfect. A divorce. The word felt foreign, unreal. Just yesterday I was planning a future with my husband. Now I was planning my divorce. "Yes, a divorce," Chloe said firmly. "And a settlement that will make his eyes water. You are not walking away from this with nothing, Evelyn. You are the mother of his child. In the eyes of the law, you are not a phase. You are his wife, and you have rights." The next morning, Chloe, dressed in what she called her battle armor, a sharp black pantsuit and a look of fierce determination, accompanied me to Zara's office in Midtown. The office was sleek and modern, all glass and chrome, but Zara herself was anything but. She was a woman in her late 60s with a mane of silver hair, piercing blue eyes, and an aura of formidable intelligence. I recounted my story for the second time in 24 hours. Zara listened intently, her face impassive, her fingers steepled under her chin. She asked pointed, incisive questions about my finances, my prenuptial agreement, and Liam's business. "Our prenup was ironclad," I explained, feeling a fresh wave of foolishness. "Liam insisted on it. It basically says that what's his is his and what's mine is mine. And I came into this marriage with very little." "Did you work during the marriage, Mrs. Carrington?" Zara asked. "No," I said quietly. "Liam wanted me to focus on our life, on supporting him." "Did you host dinner parties for his business associates? Did you travel with him for work? Did you advise him on aesthetic choices for his company's branding, his offices, the apartments he used to woo investors?" "Yes," I said, surprised. "All the time. I helped design the entire layout and feel of the new Carrington Innovations headquarters. Liam always said I had impeccable taste." A slow, satisfied smile spread across Zara's face. "Impeccable taste that has tangible value, Mrs. Carrington. We're not just going to fight the prenup. We're going to argue that you were an integral part of his business's success. Your work as his wife directly contributed to his net worth. We're going to make a case for a significant portion of the assets acquired during the marriage." For the first time in days, a tiny flicker of hope ignited within me. "And the baby?" I asked, my voice small. "The baby," Zara said, her voice softening slightly, "is your trump card. Liam Carrington can call his child an unfortunate complication in the privacy of his penthouse. But in a court of law, in the glare of the public eye, that child is his heir. And he will be expected to provide for that child in a manner befitting a billionaire's son. We will ensure that." Leaving Zara's office, I felt a shift in my own posture. I was still heartbroken, still reeling from the betrayal. But I was no longer just a victim. I was a client, a plaintiff, a fighter. My newfound resolve was immediately put to the test. As Chloe and I stepped out onto the street, my phone buzzed with a news alert. It was from a major financial news outlet. Carrington Innovations announces major rebranding spearheaded by new Chief Creative Officer Marin Cortez. The article was accompanied by a glossy photo of Liam and Marin standing side by side in the lobby of the Carrington Innovations headquarters. They were beaming, looking every bit the power couple she had proclaimed them to be. The article quoted Liam extensively. "Marin has a vision that is simply unparalleled," he gushed. "She is the future of this company. She's my partner in every sense of the word. We're taking Carrington Innovations to the next level, and it requires a complete overhaul of our old dated aesthetic." My aesthetic, the one he had praised for years. the one I had painstakingly curated. He wasn't just replacing me in his bed, he was systematically erasing every trace of my influence, my taste, my very existence from his life and his business. But the most brutal part of the article was the final paragraph. When asked about his wife Evelyn Carrington and rumors of a separation, Carrington was dismissive. "Evelyn and I are handling things privately," he stated. "She's a wonderful woman, but our lives are moving in different directions. I wish her all the best." He wished me all the best, as if he were a distant acquaintance, not the man who had vowed to love and cherish me for the rest of his life. The public dismissal, the casual erasure, was almost more painful than the private confrontation. "He's not just trying to win Evie," Chloe said, her voice grim as she read the article over my shoulder. "He's trying to annihilate you. He wants to control the narrative, completely paint you as the gentle, naive wife who is gracefully left behind while he and his new dynamic partner conquer the world." I looked down at the phone at the picture of Liam and Marin, the picture of my replacement. The rage was back cold and sharp. "He's not going to win," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "He thinks he's in control. He thinks he can just delete me. But he's forgetting one thing." "What's that?" Chloe asked. I looked up, meeting her gaze, a fire in my own that I didn't know I possessed. "I know all his secrets." Liam Carrington hadn't sprung fully formed onto the pages of Forbes. His past was a carefully edited narrative, a story of grit and genius that he'd polished to a high shine. The official bio was that he'd grown up poor in Queens, a single mother who worked 3 jobs, a scholarship to MIT, and then a relentless climb to the top. It was a good story, inspiring, and mostly it was a lie. I knew the real story, or at least parts of it. The parts he'd let slip in rare, unguarded moments, usually after too much expensive wine and a successful IPO. He wasn't from Queens. He was from Greenwich, Connecticut. And his mother hadn't been a struggling waitress. She had been the live-in housekeeper for a very wealthy, very powerful family, the Vanderbilts. Not the famous Vanderbilts of Gilded Age history, but a more modern, discreetly powerful branch of the family, headed by a patriarch named Alistair Vanderbilt. Liam had grown up in the shadow of their immense wealth, a ghost in their grand estate. He had been the boy in the background, the housekeeper's son, privy to their lives of effortless privilege, but never a part of them. It was the source of his ambition, the chip on his shoulder that drove him with a terrifying intensity. He wasn't just trying to get rich. He was trying to exorcise the ghost of the boy he once was. He was trying to become more powerful, more influential than the family that had employed his mother. He had told me once, his voice thick with a bitterness that years of success had not managed to erase, that Alistair Vanderbilt had a son, Julian. They were the same age, and Liam had despised him with a passion that was almost pathological. Julian was everything Liam was not: born to wealth, effortlessly charming, entitled. Julian was the legitimate heir. Liam was the illegitimate shadow. This was the secret I held, the key to understanding the man who had so callously discarded me. His obsession with legacy, with building an empire, it wasn't just about money. It was about rewriting his own history. And his sudden, brutal rejection of me and our unborn son, it suddenly made a twisted kind of sense. In his mind, I was creating another version of him, a son who would grow up in the shadow of a powerful father, a potential weakness, a reminder of the vulnerability he had spent his entire life trying to escape. Marin, with her sharp edges and ruthless ambition, was not a mother figure. She was a fellow warrior. She wouldn't create a vulnerability. She would help him build higher walls. "We need to go to Greenwich," I told Chloe, my mind racing. "Greenwich?" she asked, her brow furrowed. "Why?" "Because Liam's entire life is built on a lie," I said. "And I think the truth is buried there." The next day we drove up to Greenwich. It was a world away from the frantic energy of Manhattan. Manicured lawns, stately homes hidden behind high stone walls, a quiet old money elegance that felt both serene and oppressive. With a little digging, using the skills Chloe had honed as an investigative journalist, we found the Vanderbilt estate. It was even grander than I had imagined, a sprawling stone mansion that looked like something out of a period drama. We didn't go to the front gate. Instead, we went to a small local library in the town center. We spent hours poring over old newspapers and local archives on microfilm, the scent of old paper and dust filling the air. We were looking for anything that connected Liam or his mother to the Vanderbilts. And then we found it. A small article from a local newspaper dated 35 years ago. The headline was innocuous: "Local family mourns tragic loss." The article detailed the accidental drowning of Alistair Vanderbilt's 15-year-old son Julian in the family's swimming pool. A terrible tragedy. But it was the last paragraph that made my blood run cold. The family has asked for privacy during this difficult time. Sources close to the family say that a young house guest, Liam, the son of the family's housekeeper, was present at the time of the accident and is being treated for shock. My hands trembled as I read the words. Liam had never mentioned this. He had never told me that he was there when his childhood nemesis, the object of his intense jealousy, had died. My God, Evie. Chloe whispered, her eyes wide. What if it wasn't an accident? The question hung in the air, dark and terrifying. Was it possible? Was the foundation of Liam's entire empire, his entire life, built on something far more sinister than a lie about his upbringing? We kept digging. We searched for information about Liam's mother. We found her name, Elena, and discovered that she had left her job with the Vanderbilts abruptly after Julian's death. She had moved to Queens, taken a job as a waitress, and raised Liam alone. She had died of cancer when Liam was in college. The official narrative, the one Liam had so carefully constructed, had been a twisted version of the truth. He had taken the reality of his mother's later life and erased the privileged and possibly traumatic context that had preceded it. Our final stop was a small, unassuming church on the outskirts of town. We found Elena's grave in the adjoining cemetery. It was a simple headstone, weathered by the years. As I stood there looking at the name of the woman who had been my mother-in-law, a woman I had never known, I felt a profound sense of sadness. She too had been a victim of the Vanderbilts in her own way. As we were about to leave, an elderly woman, her back bent with age, was placing fresh flowers on a nearby grave. She looked over at us, her eyes kind and curious. "Are you family of Elena's?" she asked, her voice thin and reedy. I was her daughter-in-law." I said the words, feeling strange on my tongue. The woman's eyes widened in recognition. "You must be Liam's wife. I remember Elena, such a sweet woman, and so fiercely protective of that boy, especially after the terrible business at the Vanderbilt place." "You knew her then?" Chloe asked, her journalist's instincts kicking in. "Oh yes," the woman said, nodding. "My husband was the gardener at the estate for 40 years. I remember that day like it was yesterday, the screaming, the chaos. Everyone said it was an accident, but my Arthur, he never believed it." "What did he believe?" I asked, my heart pounding. The old woman leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "He said the boys had been fighting. Julian was a terrible bully, you see, always tormenting poor Liam. Arthur said he heard them shouting at each other by the pool just before it happened. He said he heard Julian call Liam a charity case and the help's brat. Then there was a splash and then silence. By the time Arthur got there, it was too late. Liam was just standing there staring at the water, his face pale as a ghost." She shook her head sadly. "Alistair Vanderbilt hushed it all up, of course, for the sake of the family name. They paid Elena a handsome sum to leave and keep quiet. But my Arthur always said there was more to that story. He said he saw a look in that boy Liam's eyes that day. A look of triumph." The drive back to Manhattan was silent. The implications of what we had learned were staggering. Liam wasn't just a ruthless businessman. He was a man who had from a very young age been capable of unimaginable things to get what he wanted. He had not just climbed his way to the top. He had perhaps cleared his path with a chilling act of violence. This changed Everything. My fight was no longer just about a divorce settlement. It was about protecting my child from a man who was far more dangerous than I had ever known. When I got back to Chloe's apartment, there was an email waiting for me. It was from Liam. The subject line was simply, "Let's be reasonable." The email was cold and clinical. It contained a settlement offer, a one-time payment of $5 million in exchange for my signature on a non-disclosure agreement that would forbid me from ever speaking about him, his business, or our marriage to anyone ever. It was in his world a paltry sum, a nuisance fee to make me go away. The final line of the email was a veiled threat. "Take the deal, Evelyn. It's the best you're going to get. Don't make this messy. You won't win." I looked at the email, and then I thought about the old woman in the cemetery, the story of the two boys by the pool, the look of triumph in a young boy's eyes. He thought this was about money. He thought he could buy my silence. He was still underestimating me. I forwarded the email to Zara with a single message: "Decline the offer. We're going to war." And then I began to type an email of my own. Not to Liam, not to my lawyer, but to Alistair Vanderbilt. I didn't know if he would respond. I didn't know if he would even remember the housekeeper's son from all those years ago. But I had to try. I had to let him know that someone else knew the truth about what had happened that day by the pool. The subject line was simple, Julian. And in the body of the email I wrote just one sentence: "I think we need to talk about your son. And mine." The game had changed. I wasn't just fighting a cheating husband anymore. I was confronting a monster. And I would use his darkest secret to protect my future and the future of the child he had so carelessly tried to erase. The endgame was indeed beginning, but it was going to be mine. The silence that followed my email to Alistair Vanderbilt was deafening. Days turned into a week. I checked my inbox obsessively, my stomach in a constant knot of anxiety and anticipation. Had he even seen it? Had his assistants dismissed it as spam? Or had he seen it and chosen to ignore it to leave the ghosts of the past undisturbed? During this week of waiting, Liam and Maren escalated their public relations offensive. They were everywhere, a fawning feature in a glossy magazine about their dynamic partnership, complete with a photo shoot in his penthouse. Maren had redecorated, of course. My carefully chosen warm, neutral palette had been replaced with stark black and white chrome and jarring modern art. It was cold, impersonal, and screamed of power. The article subtly painted me as a relic of Liam's past, the starter wife, who couldn't keep up with his meteoric rise. Maren's Instagram became even more pointed. She posted a photo of a sonogram. It wasn't hers. It was a stock image, I was sure of it, but the implication was clear. The caption read, "Building our own legacy, the right way. Cat Endgame." She was taunting me, using the very thing that should have been my private joy, my pregnancy, as a weapon against me. The cruelty was breathtaking. Chloe was my rock, a constant source of outrage and strategic advice. "She's trying to get under your skin, Evie. Don't let her." Zara, my lawyer, was more clinical. "This is good for us," she'd said over the phone. "Every post, every public statement, it's more ammunition. He's creating a public narrative of cruelty and emotional distress. A judge will not look kindly on this." But legal strategy was a cold comfort in the dead of night when the loneliness and the humiliation felt all-consuming. I would lie awake in Chloe's guest room, my hands on my growing belly, and whisper promises to my unborn son. "I will protect you," I'd murmur into the darkness. "I will not let him erase you." Then on a Tuesday morning it came. An email from a private encrypted address. The sender's name was simply AV. My heart leaped into my throat. The message was brief and to the point. "I will be at the bar of the Carlisle Hotel tomorrow at 3 p.m. Come alone." The Carlisle. Old world, discreet, a place for secrets. He had chosen his ground carefully. The man who sat in the dimly lit corner of the bar looked every inch the patriarch I had imagined. Alistair Vanderbilt was in his late 70s with a shock of white hair, a face etched with the lines of wealth and grief, and eyes that were a pale, watery blue. He was impeccably dressed in a tweed jacket, his posture ramrod straight. He looked at me with an unnerving stillness as I approached his gaze, taking in my pregnant form with an expression I couldn't decipher. "Mrs. Carrington," he said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone. He did not stand. "You asked for this meeting. You have 5 minutes." "Thank you for seeing me, Mr. Vanderbilt." I began, my voice steadier than I expected. "I know this must be difficult, but I believe we have a shared interest." "I doubt that very much," he said, his tone icy. "What I have is a 35-year-old wound that you have chosen to pour salt into for reasons I cannot begin to fathom." "The reason is sitting right in front of you," I said, placing a hand on my belly. "I am carrying Liam Carrington's son, and he has told me that this child, his own son, is an unfortunate complication. He is trying to erase us, Mr. Vanderbilt, just as he and your family erased the truth of what happened to your son Julian." His composure cracked. A muscle twitched in his jaw. "The official inquiry found my son's death to be an accident. And you paid Liam's mother a great deal of money to disappear and to ensure that was the only story ever told." I countered, my voice low but firm. "I spoke to a woman who knew her. Her husband was your gardener. He heard Julian and Liam arguing just before it happened. He said Julian was bullying him, as he always did." Alistair Vanderbilt stared into his untouched glass of water, his knuckles white as he gripped it. The silence stretched thick with the weight of decades of unspoken grief and suspicion. "Julian could be difficult." He finally conceded, the words seeming to cause him physical pain. "He was my son, my heir. I loved him, but I was not blind to his faults. He had a cruel streak, especially with those he considered beneath him." He looked up at me, his eyes filled with a weary sadness. "And Liam was always in Julian's eyes beneath him." "Liam has spent his entire life trying to prove Julian wrong," I said. "He has built an empire fueled by rage and resentment. He despises weakness, Mr. Vanderbilt, and now he sees his own son as a weakness, a reminder of a past he wants to forget. He will stop at nothing to protect the life he has built on that foundation." "What is it you want from me?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "I want to ensure my son's future," I said, leaning forward. "Liam has offered me a pittance to sign an NDA and disappear. I have refused. My lawyer believes we have a strong case, but Liam has unlimited resources. He will drag this out. He will try to bury me in legal fees and public humiliation. But there is one thing he is more afraid of than anything else." "And what is that, you?" I said simply. "He is terrified of the ghost of Greenwich. The story of what happened at your pool is the one secret that could destroy the image he has so carefully crafted. It could destroy his business. His investors would flee. His endgame partner would see him not as a warrior, but as a frightened boy with a dark secret." Alistair was silent for a long time. He looked out the window at the traffic moving slowly along Madison Avenue, but I knew he was seeing something else entirely. A swimming pool. 2 boys. A lifetime of regret. "Liam Carrington stole my son's future," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "He stood by and watched him die. Whether it was an accident or something more, he did nothing. And my family, we enabled him. We bought his silence. We allowed him to go on and build a life on the ashes of my sons." He turned his gaze back to me, and for the first time I saw not a powerful patriarch but a broken father. And now he intends to do the same to his own child, to cast him aside. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a simple, elegant business card. It had only a name, Arthur Finch, and a phone number. "This is my personal lawyer," Alistair said, sliding the card across the table. "He is not a pit bull like the woman you have undoubtedly hired. He is quieter, more discreet, but he is far more dangerous. He has managed my family's affairs for 40 years. He knows where all the bodies are buried, figuratively speaking, of course." He finally met my eyes, and in their depths I saw a new cold resolve. Tell your lawyer to contact Mr. Finch. We will not be involving ourselves in your divorce directly. That would be unseemly. But we can provide leverage, financial records, testimony from old staff, things that Mr. Carrington would prefer to remain in the past. We can make it clear to his legal team that if this matter is not settled to your satisfaction quickly, quietly, and very, very generously, then the past may not stay buried after all. He stood up, his 5 minutes clearly over. He will not do to your son what he did to mine, he said, his voice like a shard of ice. The Vanderbilt family will not allow it. He turned and walked away without a backward glance, leaving me alone in the quiet corner of the bar, the business card a heavy, powerful weight in my hand. I had come seeking an ally. I had found something far more potent. I had found a king long dormant who had just been reminded that a debt of blood had yet to be paid. The war was not just mine anymore. Liam had picked a fight with his past, and the past was about to fight back. I walked out of the Carlisle, my hand on my belly, a fierce, protective smile on my face. The endgame was coming. But the players and the rules had just dramatically changed. So what happens when a ghost from the past, backed by old money and an even older grudge, enters the fray? Liam's carefully constructed empire, built on a foundation of lies, began to tremble. The unfortunate complication he'd tried to discard was now backed by a force he could not bully by or control. The battle that followed was not fought on Instagram or in the tabloids, but in hushed, terrified phone calls between lawyers, and in the sudden, inexplicable drying up of investor confidence. Marin, his endgame, soon discovered that the throne she had so eagerly usurped was perched on a sinkhole. This wasn't just my story of heartbreak and betrayal. It became a story of reclamation. It's a testament to the fact that no woman is ever just a phase, and that a mother's love for her unborn child can be the most powerful force on earth. What happens when the fairy tale shatters? Rosalind Vance was living a dream, married to billionaire titan Damian Blackwood, pregnant with their first child, residing in a sprawling Manhattan penthouse. But as she lay in a hospital bed, her life and the life of her unborn baby hanging by a thread after a sudden terrifying collapse, her dream became a nightmare. The one person she needed, her devoted husband, was unreachable. His phone went straight to voicemail. His private jet wasn't en route to his supposed business meeting in Tokyo. It was parked on a sun-drenched tarmac in the Caribbean. And Damian Blackwood was not alone. The story you are about to hear is a chilling tale of betrayal, greed, and a mother's ferocious will to survive. The crystal chandeliers of the Blackwood penthouse on Park Avenue seemed to weep, their light fracturing into 1,000 lonely shards across the polished marble floors. Just hours ago, this space had been prepped for joy. Baby blue and silver balloons were meant to bob against the 20-foot ceilings. A 5-tier cake from a celebrity baker was scheduled for delivery. It was the day of Rosalind Vance's baby shower, an event orchestrated to be the talk of New York's elite. Rosalind, at 8 months pregnant, had felt like the queen of this gilded world. She'd walked through the grand living room that morning, a hand resting protectively on her swollen belly, a soft smile on her lips. She traced the spine of a leather-bound book on Damian's mahogany desk, his scent a crisp, expensive mix of sandalwood and ambition lingering in the air. He'd called her that morning, his voice a smooth baritone crackling slightly over the satellite phone. "I'm so sorry I'm missing this, my love," Damian Blackwood had said. "This Tokyo deal is a monster. Close it and I'm on the first flight home to you and our little man." Rosalind believed him. Why wouldn't she? For 3 years, Damian had been her everything. He'd swept her off her feet, a bright, unassuming art historian, and brought her into a world of unimaginable luxury and power. The Blackwood name was practically royalty in the world of finance and real estate. And he had chosen her. He'd always made her feel chosen, cherished. The first pang of pain had been sharp, sudden, and terrifying. She'd dismissed it as a Braxton Hicks contraction, something her doctor had prepared her for. She was reaching for a glass of water when the second wave hit, a brutal, wrenching cramp that stole her breath and sent a spray of icy fear through her veins. She crumpled to the floor, the plush Aubusson carpet doing little to cushion her fall. Her vision blurred. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was her cell phone lying just out of reach on a glass coffee table. It was her brother Nathaniel Nate Hayes who found her. An architect with a thriving but modest firm, Nate was the antithesis of the Blackwood world. He was grounded, fiercely protective, and had always been slightly wary of the speed with which his sister had been absorbed into Damien's universe. He'd arrived an hour early for the shower, a ridiculously oversized teddy bear under his arm, only to be met with an eerie silence. Using the emergency key Rosalind had given him, he'd let himself in, his cheerful, "Rosie, I'm here," dying in his throat at the sight of her unconscious on the floor. Panic, cold, and absolute seized him. The 911 call was a blur of choked words. The paramedics were a whirlwind of calm professional urgency. As they loaded his sister onto a gurney, her face as pale as porcelain, Nate's hand instinctively went to his pocket for his phone. He had to call Damien. The first call went straight to voicemail. "Hi, you've reached Damien Blackwood. I'm currently unavailable. Please leave a message." The voice was polished, confident, and utterly detached from the unfolding horror. Nate tried again. Voicemail. And again. Voicemail. He called Damien's personal assistant, a perpetually flustered woman named Bethany. "I'm sorry, Mr. Hayes. Mr. Blackwood is in flight to Tokyo. All communications are down as per standard procedure. He's not to be disturbed." "This is a medical emergency," Nate yelled into the phone, his voice echoing in the now cavernous, silent penthouse. "His wife has collapsed. She's pregnant. They're taking her to Lenox Hill Hospital right now." I will do what I can," Bethany stammered. "I will try to get a message to the cockpit crew via satellite relay, but I can't promise anything." At the hospital, the news was a relentless barrage of clinical, terrifying terms. Severe placental abruption, maternal hemorrhaging, fetal distress. Emergency cesarean section is our only option. Nate stood alone in the sterile waiting room, the giant teddy bear now slumped in a chair beside him, a pathetic, fluffy monument to a day that had gone horribly wrong. He was Rosalind's emergency contact, her next of kin on the forms, a role that should have been Damien's. He fielded calls from bewildered friends and family, canceling the shower with a leaden voice. Hours bled into one another. He paced, he prayed, he called Damien's phone another 20 times. Voicemail. Always voicemail. Frustration curdled into a dark, ugly suspicion. Damien ran a multi-billion-dollar empire. He was a man who could move markets with a single phone call. The idea that he was completely unreachable felt wrong. It felt like a lie, driven by a gut feeling he couldn't ignore. Nate made another call. This one wasn't to a friend or family member. It was to an old college acquaintance, a man who now worked in a niche field tracking private aviation for high-net-worth clients. "It's a weird request. I know, Mark," Nate said, his voice low. "But can you check the tail number on Damien Blackwood's Gulfstream G650? It's N91DB. He's supposed to be flying to Tokyo, but I need to be sure." There was a pause, the sound of furious typing. "Nate," Mark said a minute later, his voice strange. "That's not right." "What's not right?" Nate asked, his heart hammering against his ribs. "The flight plan for N91DB wasn't filed for Tokyo," Mark said slowly. "It was filed for a private airstrip in the Caribbean. The flight departed Teterboro 4 hours ago." Nate felt the blood drain from his face. "The Caribbean? Where in the Caribbean?" Another few seconds of typing. "According to the transponder data, the jet landed 30 minutes ago, on the island of St. Barthélemy, St. Bart's." The name hit Nate like a physical blow. St. Bart's, the playground of the rich and famous, an island known for sun sand and secrecy. It was not a place one went for a monster business deal. In that moment, as a doctor walked toward him with a grave expression, Nate knew. He knew with a sickening certainty that while his sister was fighting for her life and the life of their child in a cold New York hospital room, Her billionaire husband was somewhere warm, sunny, and very, very far from where he was supposed to be. And he was not alone. The carefully constructed facade of Rosalind's perfect life had just been shattered, and the truth was about to be more devastating than he could ever imagine. The world for Rosalind and her baby had shrunk to the rhythmic beep and hiss of machines in the intensive care unit. After a grueling 5-hour surgery, she was stable but weak, drifting in a morphine-induced haze. Her son, delivered at just 32 weeks, had been whisked away to the NICU. He was tiny, fragile, and fighting for every breath. Nate had seen him for a fleeting moment through the glass of an incubator, a mess of wires and tubes attached to a perfect miniature human being. He'd been named Arthur, a name Rosalind and Damien had chosen together in happier times. A strong, classic name. Kingly. Now it just felt achingly vulnerable. Nate sat by Rosalind's bedside, her hand cool and limp in his. The sight of her so diminished and pale against the stark white sheets ignited a cold, hard fury in his chest. St. Bart's. The name echoed in his mind, a taunt. He couldn't sit still. He couldn't wait. Leaving a message with the head nurse to call him the second she stirred, he left the hospital and went to a place he never thought he'd need, the Midtown office of Frank Costello, private investigator. Costello was a man who looked like he'd been carved from granite and left out in the rain. A former NYPD detective, he operated out of a cramped, cluttered office that smelled of stale coffee and cynicism. He listened to Nate's story without interruption, his gaze sharp and assessing. "Let me get this straight," Costello said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "Wife has a near-fatal emergency. Billionaire husband is supposed to be in Tokyo, but his jet is in St. Bart's. You want me to find out what he's doing there and who he's with?" "Yes," Nate said, his voice tight. "I want proof. I want pictures. I want to know everything. This kind of work isn't cheap, kid, especially on short notice and offshore." "I don't care about the cost," Nate replied, pulling out his checkbook. "My sister's life has been turned upside down. She deserves the truth." Costello looked at the younger man's determined face, then nodded slowly. "I have a contact on the island. A good photographer. Paparazzi, but discreet when the money's right. I'll make the call." As Costello worked his grim magic, Nate was left to drown in memories. He remembered Rosalind's wedding day, the way she'd looked at Damien, her eyes shining with absolute adoration. Damien had been charming, attentive, a perfect gentleman. He'd even pulled Nate aside during the reception. "I know she's your little sister," Damien had said, clapping a hand on Nate's shoulder. "I want you to know I'll spend my life making her happy. I'll protect her from everything." Protect her. The words were now a bitter poison in Nate's memory. 24 hours later, Costello's promised email arrived. The subject line was Stark Blackwood. Nate's hand trembled as he clicked it open. The attachment contained a series of high-resolution photographs. The quality was exceptional, the content soul-crushing. There was Damien Blackwood, not in a suit but in crisp white linen trousers and a light blue shirt unbuttoned to reveal a tan chest. He was laughing, his head thrown back, a picture of carefree relaxation. He was seated at an outdoor table at a chic, exclusive beach club. The turquoise water of the Caribbean sparkled behind him, and across the table from him, her hand resting intimately on his, was a woman. She was stunning in a way that was both intimidating and impossibly glamorous. High cheekbones, a cascade of raven black hair, eyes hidden behind oversized designer sunglasses. She wore a silk sundress that looked like it cost more than Nate's car. In one photo, she leaned across the table and kissed Damien, a long, languid kiss that was anything but secret. Another photo showed them walking along a private beach, his arm draped possessively around her shoulders. Costello had included a brief report. Subject: Damien Blackwood. Location: Eden Rock, St. Bart's. Companion: Genevieve Dubois, French national. Former runway model, now a purported art consultant and socialite, well known in European circles. They checked into a private villa 2 days ago. Booked for the week. Genevieve Dubois. Nate typed the name into a search engine. The results were a curated gallery of a jet-set life photos from the Cannes Film Festival, the Monaco Grand Prix, a charity gala in London. In many of them, she was on the arm of a powerful man. But the most recent articles mentioned her connection to the art world, brokering multi-million-dollar deals for anonymous collectors. The betrayal was no longer a suspicion. It was a brightly lit, full-color reality. Damien hadn't just lied about a business trip. He had constructed an elaborate deception to steal away for a romantic tryst with his mistress while his wife carrying his child was left alone in New York. A call from the hospital interrupted his dark thoughts. It was the nurse. "Mr. Hayes, your sister is awake. She's asking for you." Nate rushed back to Lenox Hill, the sickening photos burning a hole in his phone's memory. He found Rosalind sitting up slightly, her eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and fear. "Nate," she whispered, her voice raspy. Is our baby okay?" Nate took her hand, forcing a gentle smile that felt like a mask. "He's a fighter, Rosie. A real little fighter. He's in the NICU, but he's stable. The doctors are optimistic." Relief washed over her face, followed immediately by another question. "Damien, have you reached him? Does he know he must be worried sick?" Nate's heart broke. The innocence, the unwavering faith in her husband was still there. He couldn't tell her. Not now. Not when she was this fragile. The connection's been bad. He lied, the words tasting like ash. His assistant said they're having trouble with the satellite comms on the jet. "I'm sure he'll call the second he lands." Rosalind nodded, accepting the lie, her brow furrowed with worry for her husband, not for herself. Poor Damien. He's going to feel so guilty for not being here. You have to tell him it's not his fault. It just happened. Nate could only nod, a knot of rage and grief tightening in his gut. He knew with dreadful certainty that Damien Blackwood felt no guilt at all. As Rosalind closed her eyes, exhausted, Nate looked out the hospital window at the cold, gray city. He thought of the sun-drenched beach, the laughing man, and the beautiful woman by his side. The fight for Rosalind and Arthur's health was in the hands of the doctors. But the fight against Damien Blackwood had just begun, and Nate would be its first soldier. The arrival of Victoria Blackwood was not an entrance. It was an occupation. She swept into the sterile quiet of the hospital's private wing like an Arctic front trailed by two stern-looking men in dark suits who were clearly not doctors. Victoria Damien's mother was a woman forged from old money and unyielding will. Her silver hair was coiled into an impeccable chignon, her couture suit was armor, and her eyes, the same piercing gray as her son's, held no warmth, only appraisal. She bypassed the nurse's station as if it were invisible, her heels clicking in imperious rhythm on the polished floor. She found Nate sitting vigil outside Rosalind's room. "Nathaniel," she said, her voice crisp and devoid of sympathy. It was not a greeting, it was a summons. "I need an update, the exact situation." Nate stood, his own grief momentarily eclipsed by a wave of dislike for this woman. He had only met her a handful of times, and each encounter had left him feeling like a specimen under a microscope. "Rosalind is stable, but she lost a lot of blood. The baby Arthur is in the NICU. He's premature, but they're hopeful," he said, keeping his voice level. Victoria's gaze flickered with something not concern but calculation. "And Damien, have you made contact?" "His phone goes to voicemail," Nate said, watching her carefully. "His office said he was in flight to Tokyo and unreachable." Victoria's lips thinned into a bloodless line. "An unfortunate complication. I've taken the liberty of dispatching a message through more effective channels. He is being recalled. The Tokyo deal can be postponed." She made it sound like she was recalling a faulty appliance, not summoning a son to his wife's and child's side. "I need to see Rosalind," she announced, moving toward the door. "She's sleeping," Nate said, instinctively stepping to block her path. "The doctor said she needs absolute rest." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "I am her mother-in-law. I am the grandmother of that child in the NICU. I will not be told when I can and cannot see my family." The sheer audacity of it, the ownership in her tone, made Nate's blood run cold. Before he could argue further, a kind-faced woman named Dr. Sharma intervened. "Mrs. Blackwood," she said firmly, "your daughter-in-law is my patient, and she is in a very delicate state, both physically and emotionally. Rest is paramount. No visitors outside of her brother for now. That is my final word." Victoria looked at Dr. Sharma as if she were an insect, but the doctor held her ground. Thwarted, the matriarch turned her attention back to Nate, gesturing for him to follow her to a private waiting area down the hall. "This is a disaster," she said once they were alone, her voice a low, intense hiss. "The press will get wind of this. A Blackwood heir born under emergency circumstances. The rumors will fly. We need to control the narrative." Nate stared at her, aghast. "Control the narrative?" Victoria. "Rosalind almost died. Your grandson is fighting for his life in an incubator." "Do not be naive, Nathaniel," she snapped. "Every family has its crises. The difference is how the Blackwoods handle them. We do not air our laundry in public. We present a united front. When Damien returns, the official story will be that he was in a top-secret negotiation and returned the moment he was notified. Understood?" The lie was so blatant, so self-serving, it took Nate's breath away. He thought of the pictures of Damien and Genevieve Dubois laughing in the sunshine. "And where is he returning from?" Nate asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "This top-secret negotiation, was it in St. Bart's?" The direct hit landed. For a fraction of a second, a flicker of genuine surprise crossed Victoria's face before the mask of icy control slammed back into place. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice even colder than before. "I do," Nate shot back, his control finally snapping. "I have photos, Victoria, of him, with a woman named Genevieve Dubois. They were at Eden Rock while my sister was bleeding on her penthouse floor." Victoria was silent for a long moment. She walked to the window, looking down at the traffic on the street below. When she turned back, her expression was one of pragmatic ruthlessness. "Men like my son have appetites," she said, as if explaining a simple biological fact. "Genevieve is a dalliance, a meaningless distraction. It's unfortunate that its timing coincided with this medical issue." "A medical issue?" Nate was incredulous. "You're defending him." "I am protecting my family, and my family's legacy," she corrected him. "Rosalind is a Blackwood now. She has a duty. This changes nothing." She paused, her gaze turning sharp as steel. "You should advise her to remember that. And you should also advise her to remember the terms of the agreement she signed before the wedding." "The prenup," Nate said flatly. "Precisely," Victoria confirmed. "Our lawyers are the best in the world. It is, shall we say, ironclad. It stipulates in no uncertain terms that in the event of a dissolution of the marriage, she is entitled to a one-time payment. Generous by any normal standard, but a pittance in our world. She waives all claims to Blackwood assets, properties, and holdings. And more importantly, any hint of infidelity, proven or otherwise, if made public, is considered a breach of a confidentiality clause, rendering the entire agreement null and void. She would walk away with nothing." Nate felt sick. It was a trap, a perfectly legal, brilliantly cruel trap. They had bought his sister, and the price of her freedom was her silence and her poverty. So she's supposed to just accept this, welcome him back with open arms while he has a mistress in the Caribbean. She will do what is necessary to secure her future and the future of her child, Victoria stated. The Blackwood name provides a life of privilege and protection. Arthur is a Blackwood. He will be raised as one. Rosalind is his mother. She will be well cared for as long as she is sensible. The threat was unmistakable. Play along or be cast out and left with nothing, not even the resources to fight for her own son. The Blackwood Wall wasn't just about controlling the press. It was about controlling people. It was a fortress of money, power, and lawyers, and they had just surrounded his sister. As Victoria turned to leave, her composure absolute, she delivered one final chilling remark. "For what it's worth, Nathaniel," she said, pausing at the door, I did warn Damien that this particular girl Genevieve was more trouble than she was worth. He can be headstrong. She knew. The final piece clicked into place. Victoria had known about the affair all along. She hadn't cared about the betrayal, only about its potential to become a public relations problem. Nate was left alone in the silent room, the true nature of the family his sister had married into laid bare. They weren't just dysfunctional, they were predatory. And Rosalind, waking up to a world of pain and fear, had no idea she was sleeping in the lion's den. The haze of medication lifted slowly, peeling back layers of pain to reveal a stark new reality. Rosalind's first lucid thoughts were of her baby, Arthur. Nate had been her rock, his constant presence a comfort, his reassurances about the baby a lifeline. But she needed to see for herself. Against the doctor's initial advice, she insisted. Bundled into a wheelchair, Nate pushing her, they made the solemn journey to the neonatal intensive care unit. The scene inside was a surreal landscape of quiet urgency. The soft chime of monitors, the low hum of ventilators, the hushed voices of nurses. And there, in a clear plastic box, was Arthur. He was so much smaller than she had ever imagined. His skin was translucent, a web of tiny blue veins visible beneath. A feeding tube was taped to his cheek, and monitors tracked every precious breath and heartbeat. Rosalind pressed her hand against the incubator, tears streaming down her face. He was so perfect, so fragile. A wave of love so fierce and primal it stole her breath, washed over her. "He's beautiful," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "He's a fighter," Nate said softly, his hand resting on her shoulder. "Just like his mom." The sight of her son, so vulnerable and yet so determined to live, ignited something in Rosalind. The weakness and confusion began to recede, replaced by a crystalline, sharp-edged resolve. She was a mother, his protector. Back in her room, the second part of her new reality had to be faced. "Damien," she said, her voice stronger now. "Tell me the truth, Nate. No more lies about bad connections. Where is he?" Nate hesitated, his expression pained. He had hoped to shield her for longer, but he saw the new strength in her eyes. She deserved the truth. He sat down, took a deep breath, and told her everything. He told her about the jet to St. Bart's. He told her about Frank Costello, the private investigator. And then, his voice gentle, he showed her the photos on his phone. Rosalind stared at the images, her face a mask of disbelief. The laughing man on the screen was her husband, but it was also a stranger. The casual intimacy with the beautiful raven-haired woman was a physical blow. Each photo was a dagger methodically dismantling the entire foundation of her marriage. The loving phone calls, the promises, the Tokyo deal. It was all a lie. A carefully crafted illusion to cover a sordid, sun-drenched escape. She didn't cry. The tears she'd shed for her son had been born of love and fear. This new emotion was something colder, harder. It was a profound, hollow ache of betrayal that quickly began to burn. "Genevieve Dubois," she said, the name tasting like poison. She handed the phone back to Nate, her hand perfectly steady. "I see." Then Nate delivered the final, crushing blow. He told her about Victoria's visit. About the threats, the demands for silence, and the ironclad prenup designed to leave her penniless and powerless if she dared to expose the truth. "She wants me to be sensible," Rosalind repeated, a bitter, humorless smile touching her lips. "She wants me to welcome him home, play the role of the forgiving wife, and raise my son in this family of vipers. All to protect the Blackwood name." She looked from Nate to the window, her gaze distant. For 3 years she had lived inside the gilded cage, believing it was a palace. She had willingly clipped her own wings, setting aside her career, her ambitions to be Mrs. Damien Blackwood. She had seen Victoria's coldness and Damien's ruthlessness in business as mere quirks of their powerful world, not as the fundamental truths of their character. Now she saw it all. The woman who had crumpled to the penthouse floor was gone. The naive art historian was a ghost. In her place, A mother was forged in the crucible of betrayal and fear. "They think I'm weak," Rosalind said, her voice low and dangerously calm. "They think they've bought me. They think I'll roll over to protect a lifestyle I now realize is worthless. They've made a mistake. A very big mistake." She turned to Nate, her eyes blazing with a fire he had never seen before. "They threatened to leave me with nothing. Fine. Let them try. But they will not take my son. They will not take my dignity. And they will not get away with this." "What are you going to do?" Nate asked, a sense of awe mixing with his concern. "First," she said, her mind working with startling clarity, "I need a lawyer, not just any lawyer. I need the sharpest, most ruthless divorce attorney in New York City. Someone who isn't afraid of the Blackwood name. Someone who eats people like Victoria for breakfast." She paused, taking a deep, shuddering breath. "Second, tell your investigator, Mr. Costello, to keep digging. I don't want to know just about the affair anymore. I want to know everything. About Genevieve Dubois. About Damien's finances. About every business trip he's taken for the past year. They want to play dirty. We'll show them what dirty really is." "Rosie, are you sure?" Nate asked, worried about the toll this would take on her. "I have never been more sure of anything in my life," she replied, her gaze drifting back towards the direction of the NICU. "I'm not fighting for a settlement anymore, Nate. I'm fighting for my son. I'm fighting for me." That afternoon, Nate made a call. Evelyn Reed was a legend in Manhattan's legal circles. A shark in a Chanel suit, she specialized in taking down powerful men. Her initial response to taking on the Blackwoods was cautious. They were a formidable foe. But then Nate put her on the phone with Rosalind. For 20 minutes, Evelyn listened as Rosalind from her hospital bed laid out the situation with chilling precision and icy determination. She spoke not as a victim, but as a queen whose kingdom had been stolen. When the call was over, Evelyn Reed's voice had a new tone of respect, even excitement. "Mr. Hayes," she said, "tell your sister not to sign anything, not to speak to anyone from the Blackwood family. Tell her to focus on getting well and taking care of her son. I'll handle the rest. This is going to be very, very interesting." The battle lines had been drawn. The Blackwoods, with their wall of money and power, believed they were untouchable, but they had underestimated their opponent. They had not counted on the fury of a woman with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. While Rosalind focused on her recovery, spending every possible moment by Arthur's incubator, a different kind of war was being waged. Evelyn Reed and Frank Costello formed an unlikely but formidable team. Evelyn, with her legal acumen and network of forensic accountants, attacked the Blackwood empire from the front. Costello, with his shadowy contacts and back-alley methods, tunneled in from below. Costello's investigation into Genevieve Dubois hit a wall at first. Her public persona was impeccable, her digital footprint curated to perfection. She was an enigma wrapped in couture. But Costello had learned long ago that everyone has a past. He started digging not into Genevieve, but into Damien's finances following the money. The business trips were the key. Tokyo, Zurich, Dubai, Cayman Islands. For each trip, there were massive multi-million-dollar wire transfers from a subsidiary of Blackwood Industries. But the receiving accounts weren't corporate partners. They were shell corporations with innocuous names like Aegean Holdings and Alpine Ventures, registered in impenetrable offshore jurisdictions. This is where Evelyn Reed's team took over. Her forensic accountants, modern-day digital bloodhounds, began to untangle the web. It was a classic embezzlement scheme, but on a breathtaking scale. Damien Blackwood was systematically draining money from his own family's company. "He's not just cheating on his wife," Evelyn explained to Nate during a tense meeting in her office. "He's cheating on his entire family. He's building a nest egg, a massive one. We're talking upwards of $100 million that we can trace so far." The twist came when they finally cracked the ownership of one of the shell corporations. It wasn't registered to Damien. The sole director and beneficiary of Aegean Holdings was listed as one Genevieve Dubois. The picture snapped into terrifying focus. This wasn't just an affair. It was a conspiracy. Genevieve wasn't a dalliance. or a distraction, as Victoria had so dismissively called her. She was Damien's business partner in the systematic looting of his own company. The art consultant persona was the perfect cover explaining her international travel and access to the world of high finance. "She's not his mistress," Rosalind said from her hospital room when Nate updated her. She had been discharged but refused to go home to the penthouse, instead taking a suite near the hospital to be close to Arthur. "She's his accomplice." The revelation changed the legal landscape entirely. This was no longer a simple, albeit high-stakes divorce. This was corporate fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. The ironclad prenup with its cruel infidelity clause had a fatal flaw. It was predicated on a legitimate marriage. Evelyn Reed argued that the entire marriage was fraudulent, a cover for Damien's criminal enterprise with his partner Genevieve. The prenup could be nullified. While Evelyn prepared her legal bombshells, Costello kept digging into Genevieve's past, convinced there was more to the story. Why would a man like Damien, who already had everything, risk it all? Greed was one thing, but this felt personal. Costello pulled old immigration records, school yearbooks, and birth certificates from France, cross-referencing them with the sparse details he had. He found it in a dusty, digitized archive of a small-town newspaper from outside Lyon, France. An old article from 25 years ago about a local tragedy. A promising boutique investment firm, Dubois Capital, had gone bankrupt after a hostile takeover by a ruthless American conglomerate, Blackwood Industries, led by a young, aggressive Alistair Blackwood, Damien's father. The founder of the French firm, a man named Luc Dubois, had lost everything. His reputation was ruined, his family destitute. A few months later, he took his own life. He left behind a wife and a 15-year-old daughter. The daughter's name was not Genevieve. It was Juliette. Juliette Dubois. Costello found a grainy class photo from that year. A serious-looking teenage girl with dark hair and piercing, intelligent eyes stared back at him. He ran facial recognition software, comparing it to modern photos of Genevieve Dubois. It was a 98% match. Genevieve Dubois was Juliette Dubois. The entire affair, the embezzlement, the conspiracy. It wasn't about love or even simple greed. It was a long, patient, brilliantly executed revenge plot. Juliette now. Genevieve had spent decades crafting a new identity, working her way into the circles of power, all with one goal: to get close to the son of the man who had destroyed her father, and to dismantle the Blackwood empire from the inside out, just as Alistair Blackwood had done to her family. Damien wasn't her partner, he was her pawn, a vain, arrogant, and easily manipulated tool for her vengeance. "My God," Nate breathed when Costello laid out the timeline. "She's been playing him the entire time." "Looks like it, kid," Costello grunted. "She found his weakness, his ego, and his wallet, and she exploited it masterfully. He probably thinks this whole thing was his idea." The information was dynamite. They now understood the motive. They had the proof of the fraud, and they had the key to unlocking the entire conspiracy. Evelyn Reed advised them to hold the information about Genevieve's true identity. It was their trump card to be played when it would cause the most damage. The stage was being set for a confrontation. Damien, recalled by his mother, was on a flight back to New York, blissfully unaware of the storm that was about to break. He was walking back into what he believed was a messy domestic situation he could control with money and intimidation. He had no idea he was walking into a trap, one set not only by his vengeful lover, but also by the wife he had so carelessly discarded. Damien Blackwood stepped off his private jet at Teterboro looking more annoyed than remorseful. He wore a tailored suit, his face set in a mask of grim impatience. The St. Bart's tan was a stark, almost insulting contrast to the gray New York sky. His mother, Victoria, was waiting for him on the tarmac, her face a thundercloud. "What in God's name were you thinking, Damien?" she hissed, foregoing any greeting. "The entire board is in a panic, and your wife—" "I'll handle Rosalind," he cut in, his voice sharp with arrogance. A bigger check, a new piece of jewelry. She's emotional. It will pass. Now what's the damage with the press? His complete lack of concern for his wife or son was chillingly clear. For Damien, this was a problem of logistics and public relations, not a human crisis. Victoria filled him in on the situation as their car sped toward Manhattan, briefing him on the official story they were to present. He barely listened. He'd handled bigger problems than this. His first stop was the hospital. He planned to make a brief perfunctory appearance, show his face, and then get to the real work of damage control at his office. He strode into the private wing, projecting an aura of authority, expecting to find a tearful, broken wife he could easily placate. He found something else entirely. Rosalind was waiting for him, not in her hospital bed, but sitting in a chair. She was dressed in simple but elegant clothes. She was pale and thinner, but her eyes held a strength he had never seen before. Beside her stood Nate, his arms crossed, his expression one of pure contempt. "Rosalind, my love." Damien began, his voice oozing a practiced sincerity that had always worked before. "I came as soon as I heard. I was in a complete dead zone. I had no idea." "Save it, Damien," Rosalind said, her voice calm and clear. It didn't waver. "Save the lies for the press. I'm not interested." Damien was taken aback. This was not the reaction he had anticipated. "Darling, you're not well. You've been through a trauma. You're not thinking clearly." "On the contrary," she replied, her gaze unwavering. "I have never thought more clearly in my entire life. I had a lot of time to think while you were enjoying the sunshine in St. Bart's." The name hung in the air between them. Damien's face tightened. "Nate has been filling your head with poison. This is a misunderstanding." "Was it a misunderstanding when you kissed her on the beach?" Rosalind asked, her voice still unnervingly steady. "Or when you transferred $12 million to a shell company called Aegean Holdings last month, a company registered to one Genevieve Dubois?" The blood drained from Damien's face. The arrogance vanished, replaced by a flicker of pure panic. He looked from Rosalind to Nate, his mind racing. How could they possibly know that? "What? What are you talking about?" he stammered. "I'm talking about fraud, Damien." Rosalind continued, pressing her advantage. "I'm talking about you and your partner systematically embezzling hundreds of millions of dollars from Blackwood Industries, from your own family." At that moment the door opened and Victoria Blackwood swept in, having heard the raised voices from the hall. She saw the look on her son's face and the cold fury on Rosalind's, and she knew she had lost control of the situation. "Rosalind, this is not the time or the place," Victoria said, her voice like ice. "You are hysterical." "Don't you dare call me hysterical," Rosalind snapped, finally rising to her feet. The full force of her anger, controlled until now, was unleashed. "Your son, the man I married, left me to nearly die while he conspired with his mistress to steal from you. And you knew. You knew about the affair, and you did nothing but worry about the family's reputation." "You ungrateful little—" Victoria began, but Nate stepped forward. "Say one more word to my sister and you'll be dealing with me," he said, his voice a low growl. Damien, cornered and desperate, turned on Rosalind. "You'll regret this. You signed the prenup. You try to expose me, you'll walk away with nothing. You'll never see a dime." "The prenup?" Rosalind gave a short, sharp laugh, devoid of humor. "My lawyer seems to think that a contract predicated on a fraudulent marriage isn't worth the paper it's written on, especially when one of the signatories was actively engaged in a criminal conspiracy throughout the duration of the marriage. That's a game for the courts to decide, Damien. And I have a feeling the federal prosecutors will be very interested in my story." The threat of federal involvement of the entire Blackwood empire being put under a federal microscope finally hit Victoria. This was no longer a family squabble. This was a potential cataclysm. But Nate held the final devastating card. "You're a fool, Damien," Nate said, stepping forward. "You think you've been in control of this? You think she's in love with you. You don't know anything." Damien snarled. "I know that your brilliant, beautiful partner, Genevieve Dubois, isn't who you think she is. Nate said, watching Damien's face intently. You see, her real name is Juliette. Juliette Dubois. Damien just stared, confused. The name meant nothing to him, but it meant everything to Victoria. Her face went ashen. She visibly staggered back a step, one hand flying to her throat. She remembered the name. She remembered the hostile takeover. She remembered the ruined man Alistair's vanquished foe from decades ago. Her father was Luc Dubois. Nate continued, his voice hammering home the final nails in the coffin. Does that name ring a bell, Victoria? The man your husband Alistair crushed on his way to the top. The man who killed himself after Blackwood Industries destroyed his life. This was never about you, Damien. You were just the tool. This was about revenge. She played you from the very beginning. She used your greed and your ego to get close enough to burn your father's empire to the ground. And you handed her the matches. The truth crashed down on Damien with the force of a physical blow. The stolen moments, the whispered plans, the shared secrets, it was all a lie. He wasn't the mastermind. He was the mark. The perfect, arrogant fool. He looked at his mother, whose horrified expression confirmed everything. He looked at Rosalind, his discarded wife, who now stood before him as his executioner. In that sterile hospital corridor, the Blackwood dynasty, built on decades of ruthless ambition, finally came crashing down. Not from a rival corporation or a market crash, but from the inside, brought down by the ghosts of its past and the woman it had so grievously underestimated. The fallout was swift and spectacular. The story, leaked not by Rosalind, but by a disgruntled Blackwood Industries board member trying to save his own skin, exploded across the media. It was a scandal of epic proportions, embezzlement, a long con revenge plot, a high society affair, and a critically ill wife and newborn at its center. The headlines were brutal. Blackwood Empire rocked by fraud and betrayal. The Heiress's Revenge. How Juliette Dubois toppled a dynasty. The SEC and the FBI descended on Blackwood Industries, freezing assets and seizing records. Damien Blackwood was arrested in his penthouse, the photographer's flashbulbs a merciless storm. The image of him being led away in handcuffs, his face a mixture of disbelief and humiliation, became iconic. Victoria Blackwood, stripped of her power and influence, became a recluse. The Wall Street queen was broken, forced to watch as her husband's legacy and her son's future were dismantled piece by federal investigators. The Blackwood name, once a symbol of power, was now synonymous with scandal and crime. Genevieve Dubois, or Juliette, vanished. She had played her part perfectly. While authorities managed to claw back a significant portion of the embezzled funds from the more easily traced accounts, it was discovered that tens of millions had been moved through a labyrinth of cryptocurrency and anonymous international transfers. She had secured her victory and disappeared like a phantom, her father's ghost finally avenged. But for Rosalind, the fall of the House of Blackwood was just noise in the background. Her world was quiet, focused and centered around a single tiny heartbeat. Her son Arthur, after weeks of touch-and-go struggle in the NICU, was finally getting stronger. The day she was able to hold him for the first time without the barrier of an incubator cradling his small, warm body against her chest was her true victory. In that moment, the pain of Damien's betrayal and the stress of the legal battle faded into insignificance. This was all that mattered. With the prenup invalidated by the overwhelming evidence of criminal fraud, Evelyn Reed negotiated a substantial settlement for Rosalind from the frozen, untainted Blackwood assets. It wasn't the fortune Damien controlled, but it was more than enough to ensure that she and Arthur would be secure for the rest of their lives. It was just as clean and simple. She didn't stay in New York. The city was too full of ghosts and painful memories. With Nate's help, she bought a beautiful sunlit house on the coast of California, far from the shadows of Park Avenue. It was a home filled not with marble and chandeliers, but with light, warmth, and the sound of the ocean. Her life was no longer defined by a powerful man or a famous name. It was defined by her own strength, her resilience, and her immeasurable love for her son. She started painting again, her art historian background finding a new outlet. Her canvases were bold and vibrant, full of life and color. One afternoon, as Arthur, now a healthy, giggling 1-year-old, crawled across a blanket in their sun-drenched living room, Nate watched his sister. The pale, fragile woman from the hospital was gone forever. In her place was a woman who had walked through fire and emerged not burned but forged. "Are you happy, Rosie?" he asked softly. Rosalind looked at her son, then out at the sparkling blue Pacific Ocean. A genuine, peaceful smile graced her lips. "I'm free," she said. "And for the first time in a very long time, that's more than enough." She had lost a fairy tale, but she had found herself. And in the quiet, steady rhythm of her new life, she was finally building a future that was truly her own, one masterpiece at a time. Rosalind's story is a harrowing reminder that the most beautiful facades can hide the darkest secrets. It's a tale of devastating betrayal, but more importantly, it's a testament to the incredible power of a mother's will and the resilience of the human spirit. She was pushed to the absolute brink, only to discover a strength she never knew she possessed. Her journey from a billionaire's wife to a self-made survivor is an inspiration to anyone who has ever had to rebuild their life from the ashes. What did you think of Rosalind's incredible fight for justice? Let us know in the comments below. If you were moved by her story of strength and survival, please hit that like button to show your support. Don't forget to share this video with someone who appreciates a story where the hero against all odds truly wins. And for more gripping real-life dramas, just like this one, make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what's coming next.